Dozens of Hezbollah terrorists are trapped under siege in southern Lebanon. The IDF has operational control over a fortified and critical compound of the Hezbollah terrorist organization. And in Tehran, they're entering panic mode. Saturday and Friday evening saw escalation, and the Hezbollah terrorist organization launched more than 50 rockets towards IDF forces that are operating in southern Lebanon. Terror is growing stronger, and this is unity of the arenas on steroids. Iran has returned through the Lebanese door to this battle. Iran is closing the Strait of HORMUZ and threatening vessels that come near are in danger. The Revolutionary Guards accuse Israel of attacks in Lebanon. They closed the Strait of HORMUZ and tried to turn the fighting against Hezbollah into a new regional crisis. Israel is holding its fire in Lebanon, and yet Iran is escalating and continuing to threaten. And Mustafa Khamenei has a first message after the signing of the agreement with the United States. I'm Meir Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. Today is June 20, so let's begin. And while everyone is under pressure and the threats of war are once again in the air, let's take the story one step back. From the corridors of power in Washington, through a luxury resort on the mountains in Switzerland, through Tehran, and all the way to the picturesque France spa town. The past week in the diplomatic arena between the United States and Iran was dizzying. It was strange, and it was filled with surprising twists, to the point of desperate and unexpected searches for a printer inside the magnificent palace in Versailles. The mediator, Pakistan, dramatically announced on June 14 that an agreement had been reached to end the war in the Middle East. The announcement came exactly on the 80th birthday of the United States President Donald Trump, and on the eve of his departure from the G7 Leaders Summit in the city of Vienne-les-Bains in France. The announcement surprised many. In Iran, which had been tense and ready for a third consecutive night of American strikes after the collapse of the ceasefire, they breathed a sign of relief, but they remained very suspicious about what comes next. But the mystery surrounding the agreement did not end there. The developing agreement with Iran stood at the center of Saturday's news, alongside unusual tension between Trump and Netanyahu, and the continued escalation of the Lebanese arena. The question of where, when, and by whom the document would be officially signed remained open. So, did the question of the framework for continued discussions between the two hostile countries, which cut diplomatic ties decades ago, is finally solved? While French President Emmanuel Macron claimed that the agreement had already been signed electronically, the original expectation was that American Vice President J.D. Vance would sign it together with the senior Iranian negotiating official, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, in an organized ceremony in Switzerland. But in the end, Trump reshuffled the deck. Macron took Trump to a festive dinner at the Palace of Versailles outside Paris, and there, under the powerful impression of the golden splendor, Trump decided completely spontaneously to sign the agreement himself. The decision was so sudden that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to run around the historic palace in a frantic search for a printer in order to produce a physical copy of a document. Trump, as usual, signed the paper with a thick black marker, while the porcelain dishes rattle on the table after a dinner of lobster and caviar. And at the same time, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian also rushed to sign and proudly display the copy of the agreement in local news agencies. Even Iran's supreme leader published a written message in which he referred to the first time to this agreement with the United States and claimed that he had given the approval to sign a memorandum of understanding between the two sides, despite his personal opposition. The focus then shifted to the luxury hotel in the center of Switzerland, which is an isolated destination carefully chosen for the next stage of this talk. But despite all the preparations and all the drama, the meeting planned for Friday was postponed at the last minute, and according to reports, because of Israeli military activity that took place in Lebanon against the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Because the Revolutionary Guards in Iran cannot let go of their dear Hezbollah terrorist organization exactly at the moment when the IDF is dismantling it. After all, this is a terrorist organization that attacks Israel, builds offensive infrastructure for years, and plans another October 7th style infiltration into Israel just from the north. So let's move to what happened on the ground in southern Lebanon. This is between the IDF and Hezbollah. The IDF received an instruction this evening on Saturday to hold its fire in southern Lebanon while the forces have operational control over one of the Hezbollah terrorists' main centers of gravity in southern Lebanon, the Ali Taher Ridge compound near the city of Nabtia, which is considered a stronghold of the terrorist organization. This is a fortified underground compound built with Iranian assistance and considered one of Hezbollah's nerve centers in southern Lebanon. According to security officials, the fighting in the southern sector is managed from there. The fire systems are operated from there, and many weapons are stored there because of its depth and fortifications. This is a compound that is very difficult to hit using airstrikes alone. The IDF currently holds operational control over that area, and inside the compound itself, dozens of Hezbollah terrorists are trapped with no ability to leave it. And according to security officials, this is one of the reasons for the increase in fire by the organization in recent days. An attempt to ease the pressure on its besieged men, the IDF struck dozens of Hezbollah targets after more than 50 launches towards its forces, and in Tehran, they announced the closure of the Strait of HORMUZ, while at CENTCOM, they clarified that shipping continues. Throughout the day, heavy exchanges of fire took place between the IDF and the Hezbollah terrorist organization, with both sides causing each other violating the ceasefire agreement. So Hezbollah is claiming 111 killed in the Israeli strikes in Lebanon over the weekend, after tank disaster in which the commander of the 52nd Armored Battalion of the IDF, Lieutenant Colonel Dor Ben Shimon, and 3 other fighters were killed by the terrorist organization Hezbollah. In the afternoon, an Israeli official said, against the background of the dramatic Iranian announcement about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the threat of missile fire towards Israel, that the IDF had been instructed to hold its fire in Lebanon. But under the shadow of the operational control over the ridge, the military expressed opposition to holding fire. Despite the instruction to hold fire, IDF forces remain at the yellow line and continue to hold the area of Ali Taher Ridge and Tabnit. The army emphasizes this is an underground nerve center for Hezbollah, and it is forbidden to withdraw from there. There is a reason that the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are so stressed. The Hezbollah terrorist organization feels the guillotine on its neck. And look, the Revolutionary Guards accuse the United States of violating the understandings following the Israeli strikes in Lebanon, and they are threatening maritime traffic in the Gulf because of it. And at the same time, the Iranian delegation is leaving for Switzerland for talks with Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner. So the White House is advancing a deal to end this war with Iran, but this move raises a troubling paradox. The economic benefits meant to bring Iran back to the international community could boost the power of the most powerful terrorist organization in the Middle East. The exposure of the Revolutionary Guards to trade and influence networks raises a serious concern that removing the sanctions will give the organization renewed control over the Iranian economy, which is something that could legally complicate any Western company that seeks to invest in Tehran. President Trump made clear that passage through the Strait of Hormuz will remain open and without fees during the 60 days of the ceasefire and after them as well. But he also warned that if the deal is not completed, the United States may collect payment from countries in the region as compensation for its role as the guardian angel. In addition, an explosion between Trump and Prime Minister of Italy took place in the unusual diplomatic step. Trump opened another front against Giorgia Meloni, mocked her, and her political situation, and claimed that she prevented the United States from using runways against Iran. The Prime Minister of Italy responded with an unprecedented counterattack. My popularity is none of your business. The public confrontation is another chapter in the ongoing tensions that we're seeing, and it has already led to the cancellation of diplomatic visits by the Foreign Minister of Italy in Washington. We will soon get into what stands behind all of this. I'm Yair Pinto. With me is Mati Shoshani. We are here on Boots on the Ground. We bring you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and about this war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a second before we begin, I want to call on you to continue and spread the truth, share our content with as many people as possible, and click on the subscribe button so that you never miss another update of Boots on the Ground. If you want to look us up on our social media accounts, it's Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani. Now, our senior Middle East correspondent, Mati Shoshani, is here with us. So, Mati, is what is happening now in southern Lebanon not just another ceasefire violation, but the moment when Iran understands that Hezbollah may lose its nerve center in the south, and therefore it is setting HORMUZ on fire in order to save it?
If one thing has been clear in recent days, or recent weeks to be more accurate, it's the fact that Iran is very concerned about what will happen in Lebanon, but not for the Lebanese people, for the Hezbollah terrorists that they've spent decades in funding, in building up, in equipping, and in sending to be a thorn in the flesh of Israel. And the Iranian overlords are right now very concerned about what will happen with Hezbollah. Will Hezbollah be pushed back? Will it be broken down? Will it be losing infrastructure at a rate or to a significance where it stops being the fighting force that it used to be? And that is something that clearly, evidently, is very much of a concern for Iran. Now, where do we see this? Every time Israel is at a tipping point in Lebanon, every time Israel pushes back substantially against Hezbollah operations or starts taking over a very important asset to Hezbollah, such as some of the big bunker systems that Israel has been taking over in recent days and weeks in Lebanon from the hands of Hezbollah, every time they see they're losing their center of gravity, really the main assets that Hezbollah holds in Lebanon, well, suddenly the Iranians, who care nothing for the economy of the world, care nothing for the well-being of the countries around them or the people of Lebanon or any country, if we want to be honest here, suddenly they're deeply concerned of what's happening in Lebanon. Suddenly Israel is the ceasefire violator in Lebanon. Suddenly Israel attacking Hezbollah terrorists that were sent by Iran. Now it's an existential issue for the people of Lebanon. Let's be honest here. Let's just unveil the lie that is what the Iranians are trying to do here. They see Hezbollah as a long-term asset to be used to hurt the people of Israel. Hezbollah, and I say this almost every day, Hezbollah does not represent the wills, the desires, or the needs of the people of Lebanon. They're a proxy force. They are a mercenary force paid for and funded by the Iranians, trained by the Iranians, equipped by the Iranians to fight against Israel. They hurt Lebanon. They don't build Lebanon. They destroy both the politics, the economy, and of course the physical land of Lebanon and make it almost uninhabitable for the people of that country. And Israel has been fighting against the Hezbollah terrorist organization. We are the only ones fighting against the Hezbollah terrorist organization, and Iran doesn't like it. Iran is concerned about the fact that they're going to lose this expensive asset that they've built. I mean, again, this is the most well-funded terrorist organization in the world, if you discount, let's call it narco cartels in Central America. A hugely substantial fighting force, hugely substantial asset in the hands of the Iranians. And what they're trying to do now is prevent the destruction of substantial components and elements within the Hezbollah terrorist organization. Again, to remind you of what Israel has been doing, we've been taking over the bunker systems, taking over some of the main assets, destroying some of the manufacturing facilities of drones and missiles, both medium-range and short-range missiles that the Hezbollah have been manufacturing or assembling in Lebanon, and eliminating a high rate of Hezbollah terrorists almost on a daily basis. And Israel is not instigating this. Hezbollah is the one who has never upheld any kind of ceasefire. Every time there's a ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah, usually within the hour, attacks Israeli targets and tries to legitimize that by saying that they're only attacking the IDF and not Israeli civilian communities. Both are lies, by the way. They do attack also the civilian communities at the same breath as they're lying about it. And the IDF is there because if Hezbollah was on our border, they would be attacking our civilians directly. So what's really happening here? Iran is worried. They want to make sure that they have the terrorist asset that is Hezbollah also on the day after the agreement. And they've recognized that there's a weakness in the U.S. negotiation stance that allows them to exploit it and push for a unison, a connection of the fronts in this war or in the ceasefire memorandum that's supposed to take place, where suddenly, for some bizarre reason, the U.S. is willing to consider connecting the front that is HORMUZ and Iran to the front that is Hezbollah, Israel fighting against a terrorist organization. That shouldn't be allowed to happen, and it shouldn't be legitimate in any book, in any game, in any conversation. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization funded by Iran to destroy Israel. They are not there to protect the people of Lebanon or to build up the country of Lebanon, and they should be treated as such. That should be destroyed, defunded, and removed from the country. And any attempt by Iran to try and tie that into a larger conversation about the Strait of Hormuz or otherwise should be stopped at the beginning. The U.S. should just be clear and say, there's no connection between the two. If you want a ceasefire in Lebanon, tell Hezbollah to give up their arms and leave the country. They're not a legitimate force. They're not a legitimate political movement. They are a terrorist organization that fights at the expense of the people of Lebanon. Period. Full stop. No negotiation needed on this topic. No need for consideration on this topic. And any thought that goes against it, any thought that says, you know what, maybe Iran has something there. Maybe we should listen to what they're saying. Look, Iran has a clear DNA. They are a terrorist breeding entity that has spent tens of billions of dollars on breeding and spreading terrorism and suffering throughout the Middle East, and if they could have their way, also throughout the world. And they need to be stopped, and their actions should be challenged, and their methodology should be made transparent and put in the light of day for scrutiny and criticism, as it should be. That's the end of this conversation. I apologize, I'm getting heated about this because this whole thing is absurd. Why should Israel stop fighting against Hezbollah? It is a vile terrorist organization. Why should Iran, the losing side of this military conflict, be able to dictate to the U.S. what fronts are tied into the continuation of their proxy warfare? They shouldn't be allowed to continue using proxies. They shouldn't be allowed to continue funding proxies. That should be the end of the conversation from where I'm standing.
Did the agreement with Iran create a dangerous paradox? The more successful Israel is in Lebanon, the more international pressure on it is put to actually stop the operations.
I think that's a great question. The fact that the Iranians are so stressed, so concerned about what's happening to Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon indicates that Israel's actions are successful against Hezbollah. There's a direct correlation between how extreme Iran becomes in its demand to stop the fighting in Lebanon and how Israel is successful in destroying Hezbollah infrastructure and Hezbollah manpower. Now, I want to give you some numbers to really help shape this conversation. In this last war, the one that happened this year, Israel destroyed and eliminated substantially more Hezbollah terrorists than we did in last year's Midnight Hammer operation in the June of 2025. Even though then we removed Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the organization, and a whole layer of the leadership of the organization, even though back then we had a substantial pager attack against them. When it comes to fighting on the ground, not targeted assassinations, not using missiles, etc., but actually fighting on the ground, the IDF has been hugely successful in eliminating Hezbollah terrorists in this war. So much so that Hezbollah have stopped publishing on a daily basis the names of those who were martyred, their words of course, martyred in fighting for Hezbollah. I say this, they're not fighting for Lebanon, they're fighting for Hezbollah that's a proxy of Iran. They're not a legitimate Lebanese movement in any way, shape or form. But up till last year, they'd put out these pictures every day of, so-and-so was martyred fighting against Israel, and they realized it was demoralizing to their people, so they stopped telling people how many Hezbollah terrorists they were losing on a daily basis. And that really shows you the success of Israel in Lebanon. Now, again, just to say this in the most clear way possible, Lebanon is a country that has many minorities. It has Christians, it has Sunni Muslims, it has Shia Muslims, it has Druze. And of those, the Shia Muslims that are funded by Iran are the most problematic, most violent, the biggest hurdle or obstacle preventing Lebanon from moving back to being a more structured and operating country. And they do this intentionally because Iran funds them. They don't fund them for the purpose of rebuilding some kind of political movement in Lebanon. They do that to hurt Israel. And Iran is panicking, seeing Israel's success against Hezbollah. Now, there's something bizarre happening here, and I just need to say this as an Israeli. I don't understand what the logic is behind the U.S. government under the leadership of President Trump in aligning with the agenda of the Iranians on the topic of Lebanon. Iran is trying to create this bizarre equation, saying that Lebanon should be connected to what's happening in the Strait of HORMUZ. But why are we even having this conversation? Shouldn't it be obvious to everyone involved that we should just say back to the Iranians, what are you talking about? You are exporting a proxy terrorism mechanism that's called Hezbollah, that's called the Houthis, and previously was called Hamas Gaza. Why would we allow you to do that? We can agree on the fact that we've been unable to change your leadership, so we recognize your semi-legitimacy. This is on behalf of the U.S. To continue governing Iran. We're not going to carry out attacks against the reigning government in Iran, but why would we allow the Iranians to continue funding a terrorism proxy? Why would we do that? And even forget Israel for just a quick second. Let's say Israel's out of the question, and your only agenda in the world is what's best for the people of Lebanon, what's best for the people of Yemen. Well, do you think the Iranian proxies are what's best for those countries? Absolutely not. They've brought nothing but death and destruction to those countries time and time again over decades. They destroy the GDP, they destroy the infrastructure, they kill local politicians, they kill the aid workers that are helping the people that they should be helping. Why are we allowing this to happen? What is the logic behind allowing the Iranians to intertwine what's happening in Lebanon against Hezbollah, a terrorist organization funded by Iran, to what's happening in the Strait of HORMUZ? It makes no sense to me. It's utter lunacy. I just don't get the process that leads to this line of thought that allows the Iranians to dictate the terms of this. And I want just to end with one last thing. Iran lost this war from a military perspective. The U.S. has and had the upper hand, not just in past tense, but also in present progressive and future tense. The U.S. has assets on the ground that still today could force open the Strait of Hormuz, could still today prevent Iran from attacking the Gulf states almost completely and attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz, again, almost completely, almost in a full 100% sense, not 100%, but to a great degree get close to that. Why are we allowing the Iranians to dictate the outcomes of this conversation? Why are we allowing Iran, a regime that has clearly publicly stated that it intends to destroy Israel and then the United States, why are we allowing them to dictate the terms of what happens in Lebanon? Lebanon, a country that used to be considered the pearl of the Middle East, the Monaco of the Middle East, and after decades, and it is decades, of civil wars, one after the other, and intertension that's resulted mostly from Islamic factions being imported into the country, first the PLO and other Palestinian terrorist organizations back before I was even born, and then again and again by Hezbollah, that is a disrupting factor, created, propped up, and funded by Iran. Why are we allowing this to happen? Guys, respond in the comments. Maybe we're missing something here from our Israeli perspective. I don't get it. We need to be strong against Lebanon and against Hezbollah in Lebanon, strong in rebuilding the Lebanese government against Hezbollah so we can withdraw from Lebanon. That should be the equation. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be Israel withdraw from Lebanon. It should be Hezbollah withdraw from Lebanon, and let's build up the Lebanese government, the Lebanese army, to fight against Hezbollah. That should be the only equation.
Mati, are the Revolutionary Guards coming out of this agreement with a new lever, not nuclear, not Hezbollah, but the ability to threaten global trade at any moment in order to force decisions on Israel and the United States?
This last weekend has been very, very telling on the agenda that has led President Trump and VP Vance to lead this line of thought or line of negotiation, of course, through Witkoff and Kushner, to lead this line of thought, this line of negotiation with Iran up to this point. On the U.S. side, there seems to be this clear concern of causing an ongoing financial crisis related to the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump has said this repeatedly as not wanting to be remembered in history as someone who's responsible for a ongoing or long-term financial crisis. And I'm not criticizing them for that. On the contrary, I understand the desire not to do that. I think that's an admirable thing of really thinking of the global economy. But I believe there's a miscalculation there. Iran has figured out that even though they had the lower hand, they lost in the military conflict, even though still today the U.S. has the military capacity on the ground, well, it's on the sea, more literally, but in the area of the Middle East, in the Iranian area, to use Marines, to use their forces to protect and safeguard the Strait of Hormuz. Even though that ability exists, the U.S. didn't utilize that muscle to not further deteriorate the conflict. And Iran, who lost this conflict in the most clear way, they lost their leadership, they've been choked economically speaking, they've had a blockade on them for months at this point, and more importantly, from a military perspective, have not been able to put up a fight against the U.S. at all, definitely not against Israel either, but specifically against the U.S. How is it that we're allowing them to dictate what will happen with the Strait of Hormuz? Let me dive into what's mentioned in the memorandum. Again, we're still talking about what's going to happen in the memorandum. It's not fully solidified, and even when it will be, there's more unknown in it that needs to be negotiated than what is unknown. The Iranians have allowed themselves many outs, many loopholes within the agreement as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz. The last version I saw of the memorandum, well, it says something vague along the lines of Iran will immediately open the Strait of Hormuz and they will remain open for 60 days. But we're giving the Iranians also a 30-day period to figure out how to figure out the technical part of opening the Strait of Hormuz, clearing mines possibly, removing whatever obstacle there is, etc., etc. So what really is Iran committing to? Well, not much if you look at their actions over the weekend. What they've done over the weekend, they saw that Hezbollah was taking a beating in Lebanon by the IDF. And what did they say? You know what? We're closing the Strait of Hormuz again. But who says that? The IRGC says it, not the factions negotiating with the U.S., not the Supreme Leader Mujtaba Khamenei, not the government itself, not the civil servants who are elected, but IRGC factions say this. And it shows you two things that are really telling about what's happening with Iran. One, they don't negotiate in good favor. That's not news to anyone who's been following what's happening with Iran in recent decades. They continuously violate agreements with them, and they do so repeatedly. More importantly, this talk about the fact that there's a clear leadership within Iran that sort of solidifies all the decision-making in the country, is able to commit on behalf of the people of Iran, that's clearly not true. Iran still has a very strong division of power, very strong conflict taking place between, let's call it, the clerical leadership, as in the Ayatollah leadership, and what is the IRGC leadership. They're clearly not on the same page. They're clearly not in agreement. And the fact that yesterday, while we're supposed to be signing an agreement, a memorandum between the U.S. and Iran, the IRGC comes out and says, you know what? We're not cool with this. You're still violating the terms in Lebanon. Let's close the Strait of Hormuz. That brash behavior in flicking on and off the Strait of Hormuz button, it shows you, it's very telling of what's going to happen also in the future. If they did it yesterday, they will do it tomorrow. If they did it tomorrow, they'll do it also in 2 weeks while there's an agreement. If we allow them wiggle room in this agreement, they will continuously do the same thing time and time again. This is the regime in Iran. This is who we're dealing with, and we need to deal with them strictly, strongly, and from a position of power, not allow them to perceive that that pressure, that threat will work. So close the Strait of Hormuz. It's already been closed. The U.S. has enormous military assets on the ground. Use them. Use them to prevent them from keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed in. And we know this worked because Trump himself, with his own mouth, said just last week that the U.S., under the nose of the Iranians who claimed to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, were able to move a substantial amount of oil in and out of the Strait of Hormuz, despite the Iranians claiming that it was closed. Look, there's a lot that's open still. We still don't have a clear memorandum of understanding. We still don't know what will happen on the day after. It's still not clear, at least to me here in Israel, where the White House is going with this line of thought with the Iranians and why we're giving the Iranians so much wiggle room, so much pressure in this negotiation. I feel like the U.S. could have been even stronger against the Iranians. But again, I'm just an Israeli standing outside of Jerusalem from my perspective. I feel like we've learned that Iran needs to be dealt with strongly with an iron fist, and only from that position do you get the right kind of results, which we've seen work in the past. The Iranians only started changing their tune when the U.S. put a blockade on them, imposed the blockade on them. We only see the Iranians change their tune when the U.S. uses substantial force to prevent them from disrupting any kind of trade in this region. That's what we've learned. That's a lesson learned from these months of warfare in the region. I feel we're this close to really getting something substantial out of Iran. There's a lot more that needs to be worked on. We need to make sure the nuclear material is removed. We need to make sure they stop funding their proxies. We need to make sure the Iranians can be held accountable to this and that there's a real mechanism to keep them accountable. But aside from that, we're in a good direction. And I want to say this from a optimist perspective, and I really am an optimist, despite maybe the way I sound sometimes. We need to keep praying. God has been faithful to the people of Israel. He's been faithful to the people of the Middle East. We need to see through the weakening of the Iranian regime at the expense of the Ayatollahs and the IRGC, and pray for the people of Iran, pray for the people of Lebanon, pray for the people of Syria, pray for the people of Israel to have the threat of terrorism and violence removed from them once and for all. And if you have any questions of what the name of that threat is, it's the Ayatollah Islamic regime out of Iran. They are the source of evil. They are the source of terrorism. They are the source.
Mati, that really helped us better understand what we are dealing with. And to all of you, continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button. Look for Yair Pinto and for Mati Shoshani on our social media accounts. Because as missiles once again fall across Israel from Iran, Hezbollah, and other enemies, many people are asking how they can stand with Israel in a meaningful way. The answer is simple. Help us rebuild. We invite you to take part in something real, something that is rooted in the land and in our hearts. The Rebuild Israel campaign continues. It's bringing life back to Israel's north. So along Israel's northern border, an area marked by war, displacement, and loss, we are planting an apple orchard, not as a symbol for a single moment, but as part of a long-term commitment to restore what was damaged and strengthen Israel's future. At a time when Israel is under attack, planting trees is a powerful declaration. We are still here. We are building, we are growing, and we're not leaving, because God promised this land to the people of Israel, and together we can help it flourish again. So this apple orchard is more than just trees and apples. It creates jobs for local families. It helps communities return and rebuild. And it sends a clear message to the people of Israel: you are not alone. When you donate, you're not just giving, you are rebuilding. Your support puts trees in the ground. It restores livelihoods and transforms land that is scarred by war into a land that grows again. This is how renewal takes root. This is how Israel rebuilds after war. So, stand with Israel today, plant a tree, restore the hope to the north, and strengthen the future. You can do that by going to tbn.org/rebuildisrael. Again, that's tbn.org/rebuildisrael, or call 800-804-7895. So rebuild the land, restore hope, and bless the future. In southern Lebanon, the IDF is now holding one of Hezbollah's most sensitive compounds, the Ali Taher Ridge, near Nabtia. It is no longer just a name on the map. It is a fortified underground compound built with Iranian assistance, and from there, Hezbollah manages fire, it stores weapons, and it operates parts of its combat system in the south. Dozens of Hezbollah terrorists are now trapped there underground. IDF forces have operational control over the area, and according to security officials, this is one of the reasons that Hezbollah has increased its fire in recent days. It is trying to relieve pressure on its men who are under siege inside the compound. So the question is simple. Did Iran really close the Strait of HORMUZ because of Lebanon, or because Hezbollah is about to lose a nerve center in the south? Throughout Friday night, Hezbollah launched more than 50 projectiles towards IDF forces that are operating in southern Lebanon. These were not symbolic shots. This was fire meant to hit the forces, disrupt the operation, and create a political and a military price that would force Israel to stop. The IDF responded with broad strikes against terrorist infrastructures in southern Lebanon. Amongst the targets that were struck were launch positions, weapons, warehouses, command centers, and areas where Hezbollah terrorists were operating. A senior diplomatic official said that in recent days, hundreds of terror targets were struck and many dozens of terrorists were eliminated. But the heavy blow to Israel also came from inside the battle itself. In the tank disaster, a commander of the 52nd Armored Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Dor Ben Shimon, was killed together with additional soldiers, and later the names of Staff Sergeant Yoav Kilain and Master Sergeant Nir Ben Ari were also cleared for publication after they fell in this combat in Lebanon. The initial investigation into this tank hit points to an external strike, an explosive drone or an anti-tank missile, and not an operational incident. This is a very important detail because it shows that Hezbollah is not only firing to show presence, it is still operating. It has organized systems, it has drones, anti-tank missiles, indirect fire, and tunnels. It still is trying to hit Israeli forces inside the security zone. And exactly at this moment, when the IDF is holding a strategic compound, when Hezbollah terrorists are trapped, and when the pressure on the organization is rising and raising the political echelon in order to make decisions, the IDF needs to hold its fire against these threats. The forces did not withdraw. They remain in the area. But the order that they got was to significantly reduce the activity and to open fire only to remove an immediate threat. In other words, Israel is stopping the fire, but it is not leaving the point that Hezbollah most wants it to leave. That's the difference between a ceasefire and a withdrawal. And that's the difference that is now driving Tehran crazy. Because the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, they announced the closure of the Strait of HORMUZ and warned that vessels approaching the strait are in danger. The Iranian statement claimed that the United States did not implement the first clause of the Memorandum of Understanding and that the Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon are a violation of this agreement. In other words, Iran took a military event in Lebanon and turned it into a threat against the world's central energy artery. This is not an emotional response. This is strategy. Tehran is trying to establish a new equation. If Israel operates against Hezbollah in Lebanon, then Iran threatens the shipping routes in Hormuz. If the United States wants to keep this agreement alive, it needs to pressure Israel. And if Israel continues to act, Iran will present it as the side that is blowing up this diplomacy. And at the same time, U.S. Central Command says that traffic through the strait continues. And according to the Americans, dozens of commercial ships pass through the strait, carrying more than 17 million barrels of oil. Vice President J.D. Vance also expressed skepticism about the Iranian declaration and said that there is no clear proof of an actual closure. But in the Middle East, sometimes you don't need to really close something in order to create a crisis. It's enough to threaten. It's enough to make insurance companies stop. It's enough for captains to wait for instructions. It's enough for the global markets to ask whether the price will jump morning or tomorrow morning. Iran knows this. That's why it does not only close or open, it plays with fear. And all of this is happening while the delegations are heading to Switzerland. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are already in Europe. Vice President J.D. Vance may join. And on the Iranian side, you have Parliament Speaker Muhammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi that are expected to arrive. Qatar, Pakistan continue to mediate. The resort in Switzerland is supposed to become the site of the first talks after the Memorandum of Understanding. But before the sides talk about the nuclear issue, about uranium, about sanctions and money, Iran is putting Lebanon on the table. An Iranian source has already made clear that the Lebanese issue is the most important subject for this delegation. From Tehran's point of view, if the ceasefire clause on all fronts is not implemented in Lebanon, then the technical talks are not really part of the official framework of this agreement. So that sounds like a complicated diplomatic sentence, but its meaning is simple. Iran wants Hezbollah to receive immunity through the nuclear agreement. And here lies the great absurdity. For months, the United States tried to advance a direct channel between Israel and the Lebanese state. The goal was to strengthen the institutions of the state in Beirut and to weaken Lebanon's dependencies on the Hezbollah terrorist organization and on Iran. But now, through the Memorandum of Understanding with Tehran, Iran is coming back into Lebanon through the front door. Instead of separating Lebanon from Hezbollah, the agreement could reconnect them stronger. Instead of strengthening the president of Lebanon and the governments in Beirut, it gives Tehran the ability to say, we speak for Lebanon, we protect Lebanon, we determine whether there is quiet in Lebanon. This is unity of the arenas in an upgraded version. Not only rockets from Gaza, missiles from Yemen, and drones from Iraq. Now diplomatic clauses, shipping routes, and nuclear negotiations are also being used together to restrict Israel. And on the ground, Hezbollah is trying to recover. Intelligence officials in the region are identifying a strengthening of Naim Qassem's status inside Hezbollah. The man who was initially considered a temporary and unnatural successor to Hassan Nasrallah has entered more deeply into the core of the decision-making, not only policy, also operations now, and the decision to open the campaign against Israel despite the cost, strengthening him inside this organization. This matters because Hezbollah is not now operating only out of fear. It is also trying to build a new leadership, a new deterrence equation, and a new image of standing against Israel. From the outside, this looks like a dangerous gamble. From the inside, for Qassem, it may be an attempt to prove he's not just keeping the seat warm. And above all of this hovers Trump. The way the Memorandum of Understanding was signed says a lot about the state of American administration. Trump was in France, at the Palace of Versailles, when he decided to move up the signing. A formal ceremony had already been planned for Switzerland, but the president wanted to finish it immediately. Marco Rubio had to search for a printer in the palace in order to produce a hard copy. Macron was stunned, but went along with it. Trump signed, and the document was transferred to the Iranians. This may sound like a small anecdote, but it explains the whole dynamic. Trump wanted to stop the deterioration before it swallowed these markets, the energy prices, and the election system in the United States. Economic advisors warned that continuing the war would deepen the energy crisis, and Trump himself said that he did not want to see an economic catastrophe and did not want to be remembered like the president who entered history because of a market collapse. And at that moment, the American deal became clear. Open HORMUZ, stop the fire, move everything else into 60 days of negotiations. But in Israel, they're asking what happens inside those 60 days. Iran gets air. The Revolutionary Guards gets opportunity to reorganize. All exports can resume. Sanctions waivers can open. A $300 billion reconstruction fund is hovering over the table, and the body that knows better than anyone how to exploit money, shell companies, ports, infrastructure, mediation, and sanctions-busting trade is the Revolutionary Guards. The economic arm of the Revolutionary Guards, which is Katem el-Anbiya, is already deeply embedded inside the Iranian economy. Construction, energy, infrastructure, logistics, ports, communications. If sanctions are removed without a real mechanism that prevents the money from reaching them, the one receiving oxygen will not only be the Iranian civilian. The mechanisms that funds terror will also receive oxygen. And this is not only a security problem, it is also a legal problem for Western companies. Sanctions experts warn that any company entering the Iranian market could become entangled if it turns out that its money reached an entity designated as a terrorist organization. Laws in the United States allow terror victims to sue companies that indirectly assist terrorist organizations. That's why investment in Iran can become a legal minefield, not only an economic one. And before we continue, if you want to understand the Middle East from the ground, not through just slogans and not through empty headlines, follow boots on the ground. Make sure to subscribe to TBN Israel on our YouTube channel, because this is our way of sharing the truth, and we call you to pray for the situation. Now we also need to look at the strategic price of this week. Israel and the United States hit Iran hard. Missiles arrays were worn down. Launchers were hit. Ships were hit. Radars were hit. Military infrastructure took blows. But at the strategic level, Iran was not dismantled. The nuclear program was not removed from Iran. The missile program was not eliminated. The network of proxies did not disappear. And the regime did not collapse. That's why Tehran is selling survival as victory. From the regime's point of view, the very fact that it is now sitting across from the United States after the war, after the strikes, after the pressure, that's a victory image. And if it also succeeds in bringing Lebanon into the agreement, threatening HORMUZ, and making Washington pressure Jerusalem here in Israel, then it has already gained a new lever. In Israel, we understand this. That's why the struggle is now over one ridge in southern Lebanon. It is about the question of who sets the rules of the game after the war. If Israel withdraws from the Ali Taher ridge while the terrorists are still inside, then Hezbollah will sell it as a victory. If Israel stops every operation because of an Iranian threat over HORMUZ, then Tehran will understand that the new equation works. And if the United States demands that Israel gives advance notice before every significant operation in Lebanon, then Hezbollah will get precious time to disappear, scatter, and rearm. And at the same time, Israel is also operating in the southern arena. And according to reports from Gaza, the new proposal was delivered for dismantling Hamas's weapons as part of a broader roadmap. The proposal includes handing over tunnels, weapons, warehouses, military sites, vehicles, uniforms, and military-style equipment. The terrorist organization, they are already calling it provocation. And that tells the whole picture of this war. In the north, Hezbollah is trying to survive under pressure. In the south, Hamas is trying to keep its weapons. In the Gulf, Iran is threatening HORMUZ. In Switzerland, diplomats are trying to write an agreement. And in Washington, Trump wants quiet before this turns into an economic and political crisis. Israel is also fighting an international arena war. At the United Nations, Ambassador Danny Danon attacked the incursion of Israel on the blacklist alongside terrorist organizations like Hamas, ISIS, and Boko Haram. He called it a moral disgrace and demanded the resignation of officials who promoted this move. The message was clear. Israel is fighting terror, but in the world, there are those trying to place it in the same line as the terrorists. And this may be the most frustrating arena. Underground, soldiers enter tunnels. In tanks, soldiers observe drone attacks and anti-tank missiles. In the Air Force, crews strike launch positions and weapons warehouses. And in the air-conditioned rooms in Europe and in the United Nations, they try to turn Israel's self-defense into a diplomatic problem. But in the end, the Middle East is not measured only by speeches. It is measured by who remains on the ground. And right now, the IDF still is in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah terrorists are still trapped in the compound. Iran is still threatening HORMUZ. The United States is still trying to save the talks. And Hezbollah is still testing whether it can fire and then hide behind the diplomatic clause. That's the great danger of this moment. Not only war, not only an agreement, but a combination of both. Fire on the ground, a document in Switzerland, and a maritime threat in the Gulf. If Iran succeeds in connecting these three things, it will set a dangerous precedent. Every Israeli action against Hezbollah could turn into a global crisis. And if Israel stands firm against it, it will remind the entire region that even under American pressure, and even under an Iranian threat, and even against the underground terror networks, the security of the North is not a bargaining chip. Because in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, it is becoming clear now that the war has not ended. It has only changed shape. Terrorists in tunnels, missiles overhead, and ships waiting to see who really controls the strait. And if Iran is already threatening HORMUZ in order to save Hezbollah, what will happen when the talks in Switzerland reach the real nuclear question? Let me know what you think about this in the comments. In the meantime, make sure that you pray for the situation. Pray for wisdom. Pray for the people in the north and the IDF soldiers that are under attack. Pray that the world will see that Israel is fighting terrorism and terrorists and need all the help that we can get. And keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.